Jake had faced enemy ships, survived crash landings, and once walked 3 days through a frozen moon with a broken leg. None of that prepared him for the walk to the SciFi delegation wing. 2 guards met him at the entrance. They were tall, at least 8 feet, and their armor looked alive. It shifted and moved on their bodies like liquid metal that had learned to hold its shape. They said nothing. They simply turned and walked, and Jake followed. The SciFi wing was different from the rest of the station. The walls were smooth and dark, and they hummed with a low vibration that Jake could feel in his chest and behind his eyes. The air was warmer here, and it carried a faint smell like burnt sugar and ozone. Soft light came from no visible source. It just existed, filling the space evenly, casting no shadows. They brought him to a wide, circular room. The floor was polished to a mirror finish. In the center stood a figure who looked at Jake the way a man looks at a stain on his shirt. This was High Emissary Dorat Soranai, Valith's elder brother, the political leader of the SciFi delegation, and from the look on his face, someone who had already decided that Jake was a problem. Dorath was tall and lean, with the same silver skin as his sister, but his never changed color. It stayed a constant, cool gray, smooth as stone. His eyes were darker than Valith's, more like burnt copper than amber. The threads at his temples lay flat against his head, perfectly controlled. Everything about him was controlled. He did not offer Jake a seat. He did not offer a greeting. He simply began speaking. "You said something to my sister in the garden," Dorat said. His voice was flat and precise, each word placed carefully, like a brick in a wall. "You told her she was beautiful." "I did," Jake said. "You do not understand what you did." Jake waited. He could feel that this was not a conversation. It was a lesson. Dorath explained, and with every sentence, Jake felt the ground shift beneath him. The SciFi were telepathic, not strongly, not like the mind readers from old Earth movies, but enough. Their species had evolved with the ability to feel the emotions behind spoken words. Every time a SciFi spoke, the listener did not just hear the words, they felt the truth or lie behind them. They felt the weight of the speaker's emotions, their intentions, their hidden thoughts. Because of this, the SciFi had built their entire civilization around control. Children were taught from the moment they could speak to manage their emotions, to wrap every word in layers of psychic etiquette, to never let raw feeling leak into their speech. A compliment among the SciFi was not a feeling. It was a political tool, carefully shaped and measured, with every emotional edge filed smooth. What Jake had done in the garden was something no SciFi had ever experienced. Humans had no telepathic ability. They had no shields, no barriers, no training. When Jake spoke, his words carried the full, unfiltered weight of everything he was feeling. And in that moment in the garden, he had not been careful. He had not measured his words. He had looked at Valith and felt something so strong and so honest that it had poured out of him like water breaking through a dam. Valith had felt all of it, every bit, the surprise, the awe, the raw human admiration that Jake had not even tried to control. Dorath compared it to standing next to an explosion, not a harmful one, but an overwhelming one. The SciFi were used to feeling carefully controlled whispers of emotion from each other. What Jake had given Valith was a shout in a room full of people speaking softly. "No one has ever spoken to her that way," Dorath said, and for the first time, Jake heard something beneath the cold surface of his voice. It might have been fear. "No one has ever been able to speak to her that way. You broke through defenses she has spent her entire life building, and you did it with a single sentence you did not even think about." Jake opened his mouth to apologize, but before he could speak, the door behind him opened. Valith walked in. She was different from the garden. She stood straight, dressed in formal Soranai attire that covered her from neck to feet in dark, flowing fabric. Her skin was a careful, neutral silver. The threads at her temples were pulled back and held in place by thin bands of metal. She looked like a princess. She looked like someone who had put herself back together after being shaken apart. Dorath turned to her. "Veilith, I told you to remain in your quarters." "And I chose not to," she said. Her voice was calm, but Jake noticed that the tips of the threads at her temples trembled slightly, pressing against their metal bands. She looked at Jake. He looked at her. "I do not want an apology," she said. "I want to understand." Dorath started to object, but Veilith raised one hand, and her brother went silent. There was a hierarchy here that Jake was only beginning to grasp. She asked Jake a single question. "Did you mean what you said, or were you simply reacting to what you saw?" Jake thought about it. He could have given a diplomatic answer. He could have said he was just surprised, that it meant nothing, that he was sorry for the trouble. Captain Cole would have wanted him to say those things. But Veilith was looking at him with those amber eyes, full of tiny lights, and Jake remembered how it felt in the garden. He remembered the way the air had gone out of his lungs. He remembered the way the world had gone quiet, just for a moment, the way it had not gone quiet since Helios Drift. "Both," he said. "I saw something I had never seen before, and I did not have time to put up any walls. I just said what I felt." Veilith's skin shifted, just barely. A flicker of pale gold moved across her cheeks, like sunlight through water, there and gone in a second. Jake's translator chip tried to label the color and failed. Dorath watched this exchange with an expression that could have frozen a star. Veilith dismissed her brother. She did it politely, formally, and with absolute authority. Dorath left the room without another word, but the look he gave Jake on the way out made it clear that this was not over. Then Veilith asked Jake to walk with her. They walked for hours through the quieter corridors of Vayara Prime. She asked him questions about human emotions, and he did his best to answer honestly. She wanted to know why humans cried. He told her that sometimes feelings were too big to hold inside, and the body had to let them out. She wanted to know why humans laughed. He told her it was like a pressure valve, a way to release joy before it burns you up from the inside. She wanted to know why humans fought wars over love, wrote songs about heartbreak, and built monuments to people who had died. He told her that humans felt everything too much, and they always had, and they probably always would. "Is it not exhausting?" she asked. "Every single day," Jake said, "but I would not trade it for anything." Veilith was quiet for a long time after that. They walked in silence through corridors of crystal and light, and Jake noticed that her skin was shifting slowly through colors he had never seen. Soft golds, faint blues, a shade of warm rose that made her look almost human. She told him that among the Soranai, emotional honesty was considered dangerous. Their telepathic abilities meant that uncontrolled emotions could destabilize those around them. A Soranai who lost emotional control in public was treated the way humans might treat someone having a breakdown. It was shameful. It was feared. She had been raised to be perfect, to feel nothing that she did not choose to feel, to speak only words that had been carefully measured and weighed. "And then you walked into my garden," she said softly, "and you said something so simple and so loud that I could not pretend I did not hear it." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "No one has ever told me I was beautiful and simply meant it," she said. "Among my people, such words are tools. They are strategies. They are never just true." Jake did not know what to say to that, so he said the only thing he could think of. "That sounds lonely." Veilith's skin turned a deep, rich gold for just a moment. Then she looked away and continued walking. Back at the human quarters, Captain Cole was waiting with bad news. Danny Reeves had picked up chatter on encrypted Concord channels. Several delegations had noticed the Soranai princess spending time with the human delegate. Some thought it was a political maneuver. Others saw it as a weakness to exploit. The Tavrani were already drafting motions to have the human delegation expelled from the summit. Cole looked at Jake with tired eyes. "What exactly have you gotten us into?" Jake sat down heavily. He thought about Valith's question, about whether feeling everything was exhausting. "I honestly don't know," he said. "But I think it's too late to stop it." The news spread faster than Jake could have imagined. By the second morning of the summit, every delegation on Vayara Prime knew that the human delegate had said something to the Soranai princess that had caused a diplomatic disturbance. The details changed, depending on who was telling the story. Some said Jake had insulted her. Some said he had tried to form an unauthorized alliance. Some said he had attacked her with some kind of secret human psychic weapon. The truth, as usual, was simpler and stranger than any of the rumors. The Tavrani moved first. Their lead diplomat, a thin, sharp-limbed creature named Vikith, filed a formal protest with the Concord Tribunal. The charge was unregulated psychic interference against a sovereign diplomat. It sounded complicated, but it came down to something simple. They were saying Jake had mentally attacked Valith. Under Concord law, this was a serious charge. If it held, the consequences would not just fall on Jake. The entire human species could be declared a psychic threat and permanently expelled from galactic diplomacy. Captain Cole called an emergency meeting in their small quarters. Danny Reeves had been up all night reading Concord legal codes, and he looked like he had not slept in a week. "The charge is real," Danny said. "Psychic interference is one of the oldest laws in the Concord. It was written thousands of years ago to prevent telepathic species from manipulating non-telepathic ones. The problem is, it was never meant to work the other way around. So they're using a law designed to protect us against us," Cole said. "Pretty much." Cole turned to Jake. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The look in her eyes said everything. "You told a girl she was pretty," Cole said slowly, "and now our entire species might lose its place in the galaxy. Do I have that right?" Jake did not have a good answer. He stared at the floor and said nothing. Cole took a breath and straightened her shoulders. "Fine. We deal with it. Danny, find me a way out of this. Jake, you do not speak, move, or breathe without my permission until this is over." Danny dove into the legal codes. It took him 6 hours, but he found something. The law on psychic interference only applied if the accused had acted with deliberate intent to manipulate. If the emotional projection was involuntary, natural, and without malicious purpose, the charge was supposed to be thrown out. The problem was proving it. Jake could say he did not mean any harm, but his word alone would not be enough. The tribunal would demand evidence. They demanded a demonstration. The next day, Jake was escorted to a psychic evaluation chamber, deep in the center of Vayara Prime. The room was round and bare, with smooth gray walls, and a single chair in the middle. Around the edges, behind transparent barriers, sat representatives from over a dozen delegations. The Tavrani, the Dravine, the Soranai. Dozens of species Jake had never seen before, all watching him like scientists studying an animal in a cage. 3 Soranai telepaths stood near the chair. They were old, their silver skin faded to almost white, their temple threads long and thin and swaying gently in the still air. They were evaluators, Jake was told. They would read his emotional output while he spoke, and determine if he had used any form of deliberate psychic technique. The lead evaluator was called Illith. She was ancient, her eyes a pale, clouded amber, but there was nothing weak about the way she looked at Jake. She studied him the way a jeweler studies a stone, looking for cracks. Vikith, the Tavrani prosecutor, stood on the opposite side of the room. His black shell gleamed under the lights, and his mandibles clicked softly as he prepared his questions. "Human," Viketh said, "you will repeat the words you spoke to Princess Valith Soranai in the Arboretum. The evaluators will read your emotional state and determine whether your actions were deliberate or involuntary." Jake sat in a chair. It was cold. He felt exposed, surrounded by alien eyes, with no weapons, no ship, no way to fight his way out. This was not his world. He was not trained for this. He looked up at the observer gallery and saw her. Valith sat behind the transparent barrier, surrounded by Soranai officials. Her skin was shifting between silver and violet in slow, restless waves. The threads at her temples pressed against their metal bands, trembling. She was watching him, and even from across the room, Jake could see the tension in her body. She did not look away. "Repeat the words," Viketh ordered. Jake took a breath. He did not look at the prosecutor. He did not look at the evaluators. He looked at Valith. "I was not supposed to be in that garden," he said. His voice was quiet but steady. "I was wandering around because I did not know where I fit in this place. I felt like I did not belong here. I felt like none of us did." He paused. The evaluators stood perfectly still, their threads extended toward him, listening. "Then I saw her," Jake continued, "and I forgot where I was. I forgot that I was supposed to be careful. I forgot that I was representing my whole species. I just saw someone incredible, and I said the only true thing I could think of." The room was silent. Jake could hear his own heartbeat. Ilith, the lead evaluator, turned to the tribunal panel. Her expression was something Jake had never seen on a Soranai face. It took him a moment to recognize it. Surprise. "His emotional output is entirely unstructured," Ilith said. Her voice was thin and careful, but it carried through the silent room. "There is no psychic technique, no layered intent, no manipulation of any kind." She paused, and the threads at her temples curled inward, as if she was processing something difficult. "It is like standing in front of an open fire. There is no control, no direction, no design. It is simply heat." A murmur ran through the observers. Vikith stepped forward immediately. "That only proves that humans are dangerous. If they can project emotion at this intensity without even trying, they are a threat to every telepathic species in the Concord." "A fire that does not know it is burning is still a fire," another Tavrani delegate added. The tribunal panel murmured among themselves. Jake could feel the room tilting against him. It did not matter if Jake had intended harm. What mattered was that he was capable of harm, and he could not control it. Then Valith stood up. Every head in the room turned. A Soranai princess standing during a tribunal proceeding was a breach of protocol so severe that even Vikith stopped speaking. Valith walked to the edge of the observer barrier. Her skin was shifting rapidly now, colors rolling through her like weather across a sky. Silver, violet, gold, and shades Jake had never seen. "I was not harmed," she said. Her voice was clear and strong, and it carried a weight that pressed against Jake's chest like a physical force. He realized he was feeling her telepathic resonance. She was letting him feel it. She was letting everyone in the room feel it. "I was not attacked. I was not manipulated. I was not damaged." She looked directly at Vikith. "I was awakened." Dorath, watching from somewhere beyond the room, must have been screaming. The Tavrani delegates began clicking furiously. Two smaller delegations started shouting at each other. But one voice cut through the chaos. Grok, the Dravine representative, slammed his massive fist on the barrier in front of him. The sound was like a cannon shot, and the room went silent. Grok was enormous, even by Dravine standards. His scales were dark green, scarred and cracked from what must have been decades of combat. One of his eyes was clouded white. He looked like something that had crawled out of a war and decided to attend a party. He pointed one thick, clawed finger at Jake. "Any species bold enough to speak raw truth to a Soranai princess," Grok said, his voice like gravel dragged across stone, "has earned my respect." He sat down. The silence lasted 3 full seconds. Then the vote was called. Jake sat in his chair and watched as delegation after delegation cast their decision. The Tavrani voted to convict. The Dravine voted to acquit. Smaller delegations split both ways. When the final count came in, the charge was dismissed by a margin of 3 votes. Jake let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for a year. Captain Cole was waiting outside the chamber. She looked at him with an expression that mixed relief with something close to rage. "Never again," she said. Jake nodded, but as he looked back over his shoulder, he saw Valith watching him from the gallery. Her skin was a soft, steady gold, and for just a moment, she smiled. It was the first time he had seen a Soranai smile. He knew in that moment that Captain Cole was wrong. This was not over. It was not even close to over. And somewhere in the deepest part of him, the part that had been silent since Helios Drift, something woke up. After the tribunal, everything changed. Humanity was no longer invisible. Delegations that had walked past the human booth without a glance now sent representatives to speak with Captain Cole. Some were friendly, some were suspicious. A few were openly hostile, but no one ignored them anymore. Jake, however, was grounded. Cole confined him to the human quarters with strict orders not to leave, not to speak to anyone outside the delegation, and not to do anything that could be described in a headline. Danny Reeves joked that Jake was the first human in history to be placed under house arrest for giving a compliment. Jake did not argue. He sat in his small room, stared at the ceiling, and thought about Valith. He did not have to think about her for long. On the second night after the tribunal, his personal terminal lit up. A message appeared on the screen, written in a code so layered that it took Danny 20 minutes to crack it. When he finally opened it, he leaned back in his chair and whistled. "She built a private communication channel," Danny said, "completely outside the Concord network. It is running through 3 different relay points and encrypted with Soranai military-grade code." He looked at Jake. "This woman really does not want anyone reading your messages." Jake opened the channel. Valith's voice came through, clear and calm. "My brother has been recalled to the homeworld," she said. "I have been placed under diplomatic watch. They have assigned guards to my quarters and restricted my access to the summit floor. They are calling it protection. It is a cage." "I'm sorry," Jake said. "This is my fault." "No," she said. "This is the fault of everyone who decided that what happened between us was dangerous. I do not believe it was. I believe it was honest. And I have not had enough honesty in my life." From that night on, they talked every day. Valith asked Jake about human art. She wanted to understand it, all of it, the way a scientist wants to understand a new element. Jake was not an expert in art or music or literature. He was a pilot who liked old movies and listened to country songs when he was sad. But he did his best. He played her music. He started with simple things, songs with acoustic guitars and voices that cracked on the high notes. She listened in silence, and through the video link, Jake watched her skin change. Colors he had never seen moved through her like light through a prism. Deep reds, soft pinks, a shade of blue that looked like the ocean at twilight. "What is this feeling?" she asked after one song. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Which one?" Jake asked. "I do not know. I do not have a word for it. It is like sadness, but it is also like warmth. It hurts, but I do not want it to stop. Jake thought about it. I think that is called being moved, he said. It is when something touches the part of you that you usually keep hidden. Veilith was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was thick. My people do not have a word for this, she said. We do not allow ourselves to feel it. Over the following days, Jake shared more. He read her passages from books he remembered. He described paintings he had seen in museums on Earth. He told her about the time he had stood on a cliff in Montana, when he was 17, and watched a thunderstorm roll across the plains, and how the sky had been so big and so full of light that he had cried without knowing why. Veilith listened to everything. She absorbed it like dry ground, absorbing rain. And slowly, she began to share things too. She told him about Sorenai music, which was built on mathematical principles and designed to create specific, controlled emotional states in the listener. It was beautiful, she said, but it was predictable. There were no surprises. There was no moment where a note hit you in a place you did not expect and changed the shape of your day. She told him about Sorenai art, which was precise, symmetrical, and emotionally neutral. A painting among her people was admired the way a human might admire a well-built engine. It was appreciated for its craft, not its feeling. We removed emotion from creation a long time ago, she said. We were afraid of what it could do. And now? Jake asked. Now, I am listening to your music, she said, and I am afraid of what it is doing to me. But I do not want to stop. While Jake and Veilith built their quiet bridge between two worlds, Danny Reeves was doing what Danny Reeves did best, listening to things he was not supposed to hear. He had been monitoring encrypted Concord communications since the tribunal, and what he found made his blood run cold. The Tavrani had not given up. They had formed a secret coalition with two other delegations, species who feared humans for different reasons, but shared the same conclusion. Humanity was dangerous and needed to be controlled. Together, they were drafting a new proposal called the Emotional Containment Accord. Danny brought it to Captain Cole, and she read it 3 times before she spoke. The accord was simple. It stated that any species with unregulated psychic output must undergo mandatory emotional suppression before being allowed to participate in Concord events. The suppression would be neurological, a procedure performed by Sorenai medical technology that would dampen the parts of the brain responsible for strong emotional responses. The law was written to sound neutral. It did not mention humans by name. But humans were the only species in the Concord with unregulated psychic output. The law was a weapon designed for one target. If it passed, every human who wanted to participate in galactic diplomacy would have to let someone cut into their brain and turn down the volume on their feelings. They would still think, they would still function, but they would not feel things the way they used to, not fully. Cole stared at the document. They want to lobotomize us, she said quietly. They want to do it legally, and they want us to say thank you. She began fighting immediately. She reached out to every friendly delegation she could find. The Dravine were sympathetic, Grok in particular, but they were cautious. They did not want to pick a fight with the Tavrani coalition unless they were sure they could win. Smaller delegations expressed support privately, but were afraid to vote against the larger powers publicly. The math was not good. Cole needed votes, and she did not have enough. Jake found out about the accord from Danny. He sat in his room and read the document, and something inside him went very still. He thought about what Veilith had told him, about her people, who had spent thousands of years building walls around their emotions, about a civilization that had traded feeling for control and called it progress. And now someone wanted to do the same thing to humanity. Jake made a decision. He did not ask permission. He sat in front of his terminal and recorded a message. Not a diplomatic statement, not a political speech, just a man talking. He talked about Helios Drift. He talked about the day he lost his squadron, about how he had watched 5 ships burn and felt every single death like a knife in his chest. He talked about the guilt that had followed him for 3 years, the nightmares, the days when he could not get out of bed. He talked about being human, about how humans felt too much, too loudly, too honestly, and how that was not a flaw. It was the only thing that made life worth living. He talked about walking into a garden and seeing a woman so beautiful that every broken thing inside him went quiet for one moment, and how that one moment of honest feeling had been worth more than a year of careful silence. He ended with 7 words that came from somewhere so deep he did not know it existed. You can try to make us feel less, but you will have to kill us first, because we would rather burn than go numb. He sat back. His hands were shaking. Danny Reeves appeared in his doorway. He had been listening. "Cole is going to kill you," Danny said. "Probably." That was the most honest thing I have ever heard anyone say. It was all I had. Danny looked at Jake for a long moment. Then he walked to his own terminal and without asking, without authorization, broadcast Jake's message on every open channel on Vayara Prime. It went everywhere. Every delegation, every news outlet, every personal device on the station. Within an hour, it was spreading across the galactic network to billions of beings who had never heard a human speak from the heart. The response was immediate and violent. The Tavrani called it emotional terrorism. Several delegations demanded that Jake be arrested. Captain Cole found out and went so pale that Danny thought she was going to pass out. But something else happened too. Messages started coming in. From small delegations, from individual aliens on distant worlds, from species that had their own history of being silenced, controlled, and told to feel less. The messages all said different things in different languages, but they all meant the same thing. We hear you. And in her guarded quarters on Vayara Prime, Vaylith Soranai watched Jake's message alone. She watched it 3 times. Her skin turned a color that no one else in the galaxy had ever seen on a Soranai. Deep, radiant gold, steady and warm, like a sun that had decided to stay. The Soranai called this color Vaylith. It was the rarest emotional state their species could experience. It had no direct translation in any human language, but the closest meaning was this: the moment you realize you are no longer alone. The final day of the Summit of Civilizations arrived like a storm that everyone had seen coming, but no one could stop. The Grand Resonance Hall was the largest chamber on Vayara Prime. It was built in the shape of a sphere, with seating carved into every surface, so that delegates sat above, below, and around the central platform. The walls were made of the same living crystal as the rest of the station, but here they were tuned to amplify psychic resonance. Every word spoken from the central platform would carry not just sound, but feeling. Every being in the room would sense the emotional truth behind whatever was said. Over 40 delegations filled the hall. The Tavrani coalition sat together on the upper tiers, their black shells gleaming. The Dravine occupied a wide section near the base, their massive bodies taking up 3 times the space allotted. Dozens of smaller species filled every remaining seat. The air hummed with tension, and the crystal walls glowed a faint, uneasy red. Captain Megan Cole stood on the central platform. She wore her dress uniform, pressed and perfect, and she spoke clearly and calmly. She presented humanity's formal objection to the Emotional Containment Accord. She talked about rights, about precedent, about the legal foundations of the Concord itself. She was good. She was professional. She was everything a diplomat should be. But the political math had not changed. The Tavrani coalition had the votes. Cole knew it. Everyone in the room knew it. Viketh rose to deliver the coalition's closing statement. He spoke about safety, about order, about the need to protect the Concorde from uncontrolled psychic forces. His words were sharp and well-crafted, and they landed exactly where he wanted them to. The vote was about to be called. Then the doors of the Grand Resonance Hall opened. Every head turned. Veilith Soranai walked into the chamber alone. She was not wearing diplomatic attire. She wore the traditional robes of the Soranai royal lineage, garments that had not been seen at a Concorde event in over 500 years. The robes were dark as deep space, woven with threads that caught the light and held it, so that she seemed to carry stars in the fabric that moved around her. Her skin was unhidden, shifting freely between silver and violet. The metal bands that had held her temple threads in place were gone. The threads floated openly around her head, alive and reaching. She had removed every barrier, every wall, every piece of control. Somewhere on the Soranai homeworld, Dorath was watching through a live feed. He sent an emergency command for her to stand down. The message arrived on her personal device. She did not look at it. Veilith stepped onto the central platform. The crystal walls of the hall shifted color as she moved, responding to her psychic presence. They turned from red to deep violet to a shade of dark gold that made the entire chamber feel warm. She spoke in the Soranai high tongue, and the resonance carried through the hall like a wave. Every being in the room felt the weight of her words pressing against their minds, not painful, not intrusive, but undeniable, like standing in sunlight and being unable to ignore the warmth. She told the Concorde that she had spent her entire life being controlled, that from the moment she was born, she had been taught to measure every emotion, to speak only in calculated truths, to never allow herself to feel anything that had not been approved and reviewed and carefully shaped into something safe. She told them that she had believed this was strength, that for 200 years she had walked through her life behind walls so thick that nothing could reach her, and she had called this peace. Then she told them about a human who walked into a garden. She said that he was not elegant, he was not careful, he was not trained. He was a broken man carrying guilt he could not put down, and he had looked at her and said something so simple that it should not have mattered at all. But it did matter. It mattered because it was true. Not measured truth, not political truth, not truth wrapped in layers of careful meaning. Just a man looking at a woman and saying something honest because he could not help himself. And she had felt every bit of it. Not his words, his heart, unshielded, uncontrolled, unafraid. She told the Concorde that she had spent the days since listening to human music, reading human poetry, studying human history. She said she had heard songs that made colors move through her skin that she did not know existed. She said she had read words written by humans who had been dead for centuries, but whose feelings were still alive on the page, still burning, still reaching out across time to touch anyone willing to listen. She told the Concorde that the emotional containment accord was not about protecting the galaxy from humans. It was about fear. Fear that the humans were right. Fear that feeling deeply, openly, and without restraint was not the weakness the galaxy had always believed it to be. Fear that it was, in fact, the bravest thing any species could do. She turned and looked directly at the Tavrani delegation. "You call their emotions a weapon," she said. Her skin blazed with shifting colors, silver and violet and gold and shades that had no name in any language. The crystal walls of the hall burned with her resonance, filling the chamber with light. But a weapon is designed to harm. What this human did was not designed at all. It was real, and that is what frightens you. She paused. The hall was silent enough to hear the hum of the station's engines, far below. "I would rather feel one moment of unfiltered human honesty," she said, "than 1,000 years of carefully constructed silence." No one moved. Then Grok the Dravine stood up. He did not speak. He simply rose to his full height, and the sound of his chair scraping back echoed through the hall like a drumbeat. He crossed his scarred arms over his massive chest and nodded once. 3 smaller delegations stood with him. Then 5 more. Then 8. The Tavrani coalition began to crack. Delegates who had committed their votes out of political convenience looked around the room and realized that the ground had shifted beneath them. This was no longer a vote about law. It was a vote about what kind of galaxy they wanted to live in. The Emotional Containment Accord was defeated by 11 votes. Captain Cole, standing at the edge of the platform, let out a breath so long it seemed like she had been holding it for days. Danny Reeves, watching from the communications booth, put his head down on his console and closed his eyes. In the silence that followed the vote, Jake Holloway was brought to the central platform. He had watched everything from a holding area behind the hall. He had heard Valeth's words through a speaker, and he had sat alone in the small room and felt things he did not know how to name. Now he was walking through the biggest room he had ever been in, surrounded by 40 alien species, every eye in the chamber on him. Captain Cole expected a speech. Danny had written talking points and sent them to Jake's device. The Galactic Press Corps was recording everything. Jake walked to the center of the platform. He looked up at the tiers of delegates stretching in every direction. He looked at the Tavrani, still and silent. He looked at Grok, who watched him with his one good eye. He looked at the hundreds of beings who had just decided that humanity deserved to keep feeling. He looked at Valeth, standing at the edge of the platform, her skin glowing a soft and steady gold. He did not give a speech. He said 6 words. "Thank you for letting us feel." The hall was silent. The crystal walls shifted to a deep, warm amber, responding to something in the room that even they could not quite define. Then, one by one, the delegations began to rise. Not in applause. Many of these species did not clap. Some bowed their heads. Some placed their hands over their chests. The Dravine stamped their feet in a slow, heavy rhythm that shook the floor. Each species acknowledged the moment in their own way, and together it became something larger than any one gesture. Valeth crossed the platform. She walked slowly, her robes trailing starlight behind her, her skin burning gold. She stopped in front of Jake and looked at him with those amber eyes full of tiny lights. She placed her hand against his chest, directly over his heart. It was a Soranai gesture, older than the Concord itself. It meant, in its simplest form, "I feel what you feel." Jake did not flinch. He did not step back. He placed his hand over hers and held it there. Her skin turned Valeth gold, deep and radiant and warm. And this time, standing this close, Jake felt it. Not through telepathy, not through any alien technology. He felt it the way humans have always felt the most important things, through the simple, unmistakable pressure of another heart beating close to his own. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy changed in small but permanent ways. Humanity's status in the Galactic Concord was elevated from provisional observer to full participating member. It was a process that normally took centuries. It happened in one afternoon. Jake Holloway was reassigned to a newly created position, cultural liaison to the Soranai Dominion. He was the first human to hold such a role with any major Concord civilization. He moved to a small apartment on the Soranai station orbiting their homeworld, and he spent his days doing something he never expected. He shared music. He shared stories. He shared the messy, loud, uncontrolled beauty of being human, with a species that had forgotten what it felt like to feel. Valeth began a project within the Dominion to study human emotional expression, It was controversial. Traditionalists called it dangerous. But she was a princess, and she had earned something that day in the Grand Resonance Hall that no amount of tradition could take away. The respect of a galaxy that had watched her choose honesty over safety. Danny Reeves was promoted and given command of a new communications division focused on translating human cultural works for alien audiences. Within 6 months, human music was the most downloaded media category on the Galactic Network. A 300-year-old country song about losing a truck and a dog somehow became the #1 track on 7 different planets. Captain Megan Cole returned to Earth as a hero. She was appointed to lead humanity's new Galactic Affairs division. She never fully forgave Jake, but years later, at a ceremony in his honor, she stood at the podium and said, "He did the one thing I could never teach him to do. He told the truth at the worst possible time, and somehow it was exactly the right thing." Doraf Soranai never fully reconciled with his sister, but the anger faded over time, replaced by something quieter and more complicated. Years later, he was overheard speaking to a junior diplomat who had asked about the famous incident at the summit. "The human was not wrong," Doraf said. "He was simply too honest for us to handle. And that was our failing, not his." And across the galaxy, on stations and ships and worlds that Jake Holloway would never visit, a story was told. It changed in the telling, the way all good stories do, but the heart of it stayed the same. A human walked into a garden, and instead of being careful, instead of being measured, instead of being smart, he said the truest thing he could. 6 simple words that broke through walls that had stood for 1,000 years. "You're so beautiful, I can't find the words." Jake Holloway had never wanted to be a diplomat. He was a pilot, a fighter, a man who solved problems by flying fast and shooting straight. But after losing his entire squadron near the Helios Drift 3 years ago, the military decided he was too broken to fly and too stubborn to retire. So they gave him a clean uniform, a new title, and told him to shake hands with aliens instead of shooting at them. Now he stood inside Veyara Prime, the largest space station in the known galaxy, feeling like a kid who had wandered into a room full of adults. The station was enormous. Its walls were made of some kind of living crystal that changed color depending on who walked past. The air smelled like rain and something sweet he could not name. Thousands of alien beings moved through the wide corridors, speaking in languages his translator chip could barely keep up with. He was part of a 3-person team. Captain Megan Cole led the delegation. She was sharp, calm, and never smiled unless she meant it. Danny Reeves handled communications. He was young, loud, and talked too much, but he was good at his job. And then there was Jake, the guy they brought along because someone in command thought a former combat pilot might be useful at a peace summit. He was not useful. He was bored. The Summit of Civilizations happened once every 10 years. Over 40 alien species sent their best diplomats to talk, argue, and make deals that shaped the future of the galaxy. Humanity had only been part of this world for a short time. Most species saw humans as loud, messy, emotional creatures who had barely learned to leave their own solar system. The human delegation's booth had been placed in a back corner near the janitorial wing. Nobody visited. Jake spent the first day standing around, smiling at aliens who did not smile back. The Tavarani, a tall, insect-like race with shiny black shells and thin legs, walked past the human booth and made clicking sounds that his translator turned into laughter. The Dravin, who looked like someone had crossed a lizard with a mountain, did not even look at him. By the evening of the first day, Jake was done pretending. He wandered away from the main halls and found himself in a part of the station he was not supposed to be in. A set of thin glass doors opened when he touched them, and he stepped into a garden unlike anything he had ever seen. It was a zero-gravity arboretum. Plants from 100 different worlds floated in the open air, glowing softly in colors of blue, green, purple, and white. There was no ground beneath his feet. The moment he stepped through the door, he floated upward, surrounded by living light. Vines drifted past him like slow rivers. Flowers, the size of his head, pulsed gently, as if they were breathing. And there, in the middle of it all, was a woman. She was not human. He knew that immediately. But the word woman was the only one his brain could find, because she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Her skin shifted between shades of pale silver and deep violet, like clouds moving across a twilight sky. Her eyes were large and bright, the color of amber, with tiny flecks of white light drifting inside them, like stars caught in honey. Thin, almost invisible threads extended from her temples, floating in the air around her head like strands of silk caught in a breeze. They moved on their own, reacting to the glowing plants around her. She was floating with her back to him, her fingers gently touching a vine that pulsed brighter at her touch. She wore a long, flowing garment that moved like water in the zero gravity. She looked like she belonged here, like the garden had been built just for her. Jake forgot to breathe. She must have sensed him because she turned slowly. Her eyes found his, and she tilted her head to one side. His translator chip fed him a single word for her expression: curiosity. Jake knew he should say something diplomatic, something careful, something that would not start an intergalactic incident. He knew Captain Cole would want him to introduce himself properly, state his rank, and offer formal greetings on behalf of the human delegation. Instead, he said the first thing that came to his mouth: "You're so beautiful I can't find the words." It came out quiet, almost like he was talking to himself, like the sentence had escaped before he could catch it. The woman froze. Her skin, which had been shifting gently between silver and violet, suddenly flushed a deep, dark indigo. The threads at her temples flared outward, like the petals of a startled flower, then went completely still. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, Jake thought he had offended her in some terrible way. She stared at him. He stared back. The glowing plants drifted silently around them. Then, without a single word, she turned and glided away through the floating garden. She moved through the vines and flowers like a ghost, and within seconds, she was gone. Jake floated there alone, surrounded by alien light, feeling like an idiot. He found his way back to the human quarters an hour later. Danny Reeves took one look at his face and started laughing. Captain Cole asked him where he had been, and he told her the truth. She closed her eyes, rubbed her temples, and told him that if he had just caused a diplomatic crisis with a garden, she was going to personally throw him out of an airlock. Jake went to his small room and sat on the edge of his bed. He could not stop thinking about the way her skin had changed color, the way those threads had gone still, the way she had looked at him like he had said something impossible. He told himself it did not matter. He told himself he would never see her again. 3 hours later, his personal terminal lit up with an incoming message. It was encrypted, sealed with a code his system almost could not read. Danny had to help him open it. It was a formal invitation to a private audience with the Sorenai delegation. The message bore a personal seal that Danny identified with wide eyes as belonging to the youngest princess of the Sorenai Dominion, one of the most powerful civilizations in the known galaxy. Her name was Valith Sorenai, and she wanted to see him. Danny looked at Jake. Jake looked at Danny. "What did you say to her?" Danny asked. "I told her she was beautiful." Danny stared at him for a long moment, then let out a slow breath. "You're either the bravest man alive or the dumbest. I honestly can't tell." Jake could not tell either, but as he read the invitation again, he felt something he had not felt in 3 years. Not since Helios Drift, not since the day he lost everything. He felt like maybe, just maybe, something was about to begin.